builds out of control.
Professor Wilson has suggested that the two murders aren't linked and that Linda Farrow was killed after an argument that got out of control. That chimes with some of what her mother Gladys claimed in my recorded interview with her, that Linda's estranged husband Paul was somehow involved.
I decided it's time that I spoke to somebody. I can tell you the full story.
Paul and Linda had been together since she was a teenager and had 2 children, but their marriage wasn't a happy one.
The big background to this relationship is that, according to Gladys, from the very beginning, it's abusive.
Once the children told us the father hit his mother on the head with a telephone and tried to strangle her with a cord. He drove her mad so much, it made her a nervous wreck.
And then she eventually plucks up courage to leave him.
Yeah.
And she meets somebody else, in fact. Linda takes the kids but doesn't tell Paul her new address.
Linda had become a successful croupier and was carrying her new partner's child. Meanwhile, Paul had lost his family and his job at the casino.
Linda's the major breadwinner.
Yeah.
Paul is diabetic, he's losing his eyesight,
Yeah.
he's unable to earn his own living.
According to Gladys, this gave Paul multiple motives for wanting Linda dead. But there was a bombshell in Gladys's interview. She believed that her daughter had met Eve Stratford's killer and died because he feared she would reveal his name.
Linda and Paul used to socialize with this group of people, and you need to pay attention because it's extraordinary.
Paul Farrow told his friends to go to his house and stay the weekend. That's where they made their mistake. They were laughing and they were saying the way he kidded to the police. And when they done that to that Eve what's-her-name, that's when she learned what they'd done.
Someone in the circle of Paul Farrow's acquaintances is responsible for the murder of Eve Stratford. This is according to Gladys, this is the motive for Eve Stratford's murder.
This person was having trouble with an errand, right? And they've hired this man to go in after that girl.
You're talking about Eve Stratford?
Yes, that's it.
The bunny girl?
That's it.
What was his name?
His name?
Yeah.
He's the one. He's the copper. He was a ex-policeman, ex-publican, ex-Arab minder.
It's an amazing theory, is the idea that Linda is privy to this information, but then when she leaves Paul and she puts herself outside the circle of trust, she makes herself a target. They are worried about her revealing the information she has to the Eve Stratford murder. What is your honest view of Gladys's analysis or her detective work?
I think her detective work is of a mother who is desperate to get justice for her daughter. What I picked up from the tapes was that there was a piece of information that she'd got from the newspapers over there, a piece of information that she'd picked up from somebody who mentioned something to her from over there, almost like a magpie picking shiny bits of information and constructing a coherent whole.
Yeah, that's, I mean, I think that the thing about Gladys, the thing that's so tantalizing about Gladys's theory is that it wraps up everything. It solves everything.
It's too neat. That's my fear.
I've spent a long time looking into Gladys's theories, and I've learned that police cleared Paul Farrow, Linda's estranged husband, of any involvement in her murder, and he died in 1981. And they also cleared his associates. As for this guy who Gladys puts at the centre of both murders, this ex-policeman who killed Eve Stratford on the orders of a mysterious Arab client. There's just not a shred of evidence to support that. This ex-policeman did know both Linda and Paul Farrow. He employed them at a casino, and he was questioned in 1979, but cleared of any involvement in Linda's murder. And for the past 50 years, he's lived out of the country.
With Paul Farrow now dead, this former policeman who befriended him seems like the best chance I have of finding Linda's killer. The former policeman was my best hope of finding out who killed Linda Farrow. But he was proving hard to reach.
Welcome to voicemail service.
In the meantime, I'd achieved a promising breakthrough. Our team had managed to get hold of Eve Stratford's coroner's report. It contained witness statements from people who knew Eve.
The coroner's report in the Eve Stratford case is an amazing document, and it raises so many things that I hadn't thought about.
It revealed that at the time of her death, Eve was no longer working at the Playboy Club. I learned she'd been suspended for posing nude in Mayfair, a rival magazine.
Stand on this leg.
Trish Murphy was the woman who had the job of telling Eve that she was suspended when news came out that she'd posed for this rival publication. And I think that's a useful lead. There might be something there. Do you remember when you saw it for the first time?
Yes, somebody came into the club waving the magazine that she was in.
Who was that person?
As far as I remember, it was Abdul Kaja that came in waving the magazine around.
Who was Abdul Kaja?
Well, he was there every day. He was some kind of a Mr. Fix-It for rich Arabs. He was trying to show that he had connections with the girls.
Why would he be waving the magazine around?
Well, because he was showing off the pictures. He wasn't a nice character, and he did like to show off.
So you'd taken the copy off Abdul?
Somebody else brought it up, the day manager. As soon as we saw the magazine, we got Ava off the floor.
You bring her into the bunny mother's office?
Yes.
What unfolds in there?
Well, we showed her the magazine, and she wasn't expecting it to come out for another few days. She started looking at it, and she got very, very upset. They were more revealing than she expected them to be, and she started crying. I felt very sorry for her, poor little girl. This is the ones that she got upset about. She said, I didn't sit like that. He was still taking pictures as I was moving.
But you had to then also be the, I don't want to say bad cop, but you had a...
Well, we said, you know, we'll suspend you for 3 months and see what happens. And that's the last I saw of her, really.
Do you remember when you heard the news about her murder?
Yes, I just came into work and the police were there, and they called people up for interviews.
Did you get a sense of what their initial lines of inquiry were?
Abdul was the suspect.
Abdul Kaja.
Yes.
Did they speculate about what his motive might have been?
I don't know.
And what was he like to you?
In the early days, he didn't speak very good English, and you'd feel a bit sorry for him. That's how he started. He ended up being somebody probably a bit sinister. He obviously had his own agenda. I don't know. I think it's probably down to him that Playboy closed. I don't know. It was my theory at the time.
Playboy's troubles all began earlier this year when the police raided the Park Lane casino. Playboy's best clients have been Arabs. According to the auditor's report, in the space of only 1 year, 30 punters, mostly Arabs, lost more than £20 million. They were the club's major source of income. Several of them were introduced by one mysterious individual, Abdul Kaja. The police and the gaming board's objections specifically cite Playboy's failure to control Kaja's activities and allege that he gamed dishonestly, loaned money to patrons, and was active in procuring women for immoral purposes for those frequenting the casino.
I knew him and liked him, and I used to play backgammon with him here in London at my apartment, and I won a lot of money off him.
Abdul Kaja was close to the most powerful man in the Playboy Club. But who was he really? And what was his link to Eve Stratford?
So this is tabloid coverage about Abdul Kaja. Seems to have made himself indispensable. He's called the court jester of the Playboy Club. He manages to get a 16-year-old Arab sheikh membership to the Playboy Club, and this guy then goes on to lose £3 million at the gambling tables. A bodyguard tells the newspapers that Abdul Kaja is a pimp.
Abdul Kaja denied all of these allegations that were made against him. But he was censured by the gaming board in 1981, who called him the unacceptable face of the Playboy Club. The coverage of Abdul's wrongdoings was, I think, fueled by anti-Arab prejudice. But he did bring the Playboy Club into disrepute. It lost its gambling license in 1981. What's interesting is that these reports also connect Abdul and Eve.
It's very hard to sort out what's undoubtedly true from tabloid fantasy in some of these articles. It's a brew of fact, salacious gossip, and not for the first time in history, the newspaper articles are trying to make the most of whatever revelations they've latched on. It seems like Eve and he had, I don't know what kind of relationship it was, but the fact that he's this dodgy character with odd connections to people in the club, this makes him a person of enormous interest to the investigation.
I now feel certain that Abdul was the Middle Eastern man who Tony called Ali, and he was clearly a police suspect in Eve's murder. Abdul always maintained his innocence, but suspicion hung over him for decades, even after his death.
I know during the initial part of the investigation, and even subsequently, there's been a lot of talk about Abdul Kaja and his potential involvement in Eve's murder.
I think the groundwork was laid by the police. They were completely, utterly, 100% sure that he did it. I remember Penny on the switchboard ringing me upstairs and saying, "Serena, the police are here. They want to speak to you about Bunny Abe." I said, "Okay." And I remember the tall man, him being very firm, very firm. "We'll get him, Serena. We know it's Abdul, and we will get him." And I remember saying, "How can you be so sure?" "Oh, we just know it's him." He built this foundation to support their case it was Abdul, but they seem to not be able to actually put him at the scene. There was no evidence. He was labelled the murderer of Bunny Abe, Eve Stratford, and there it stuck until his death. Until after his death, they exonerated him through DNA. In later years, his son was able to prove that it was not his father that killed Bunny Abe. It was not Abdul Kaja. And they had to apologize to the family. I mean, Abdul was collateral damage. But let's not forget, we do not know who murdered Bunny Abe.
Did racism fuel assumptions about Abdul's guilt and lead the investigation astray? Who knows? But what's certain is that Abdul, Eve, and Linda inhabited the same nocturnal world, one where millions were at stake at gambling tables, and there were dark motives and dirty tricks. The idea that both women were murdered by one man who inhabited the glamorous world of London's West End, was so tantalising that detectives were unable to let go of it for decades. Then, in the early noughties, technology delivered a double breakthrough that would turn the case on its head. The very same DNA evidence that exonerated Abdul Kaja and proved he wasn't the man who wielded the knife linked Eve Stratford's murder to another horrific crime, the murder of a schoolgirl in West London.
29 years after the crimes committed, you have a DNA match.
Yeah, but it's not an individual, it's matched another crime scene.
And the final part of the Playboy Bunny murder continues tomorrow at 9 here on ITV1, where Marcel examines links to another case. Anton Deck welcome our stars as they touch down for some bush tucker in new I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, kicking off Sunday at 9. Next, the news.
It's really a response to the Puritan ethic that exists in America, and I guess that we share with England.
A response against the Puritan ethic?
Yes. An attack on what I feel are the negative aspects of the anti-sexual and anti-play and pleasure aspects of our tradition.
Forgive me, but aren't you introducing a kind of sociological aspect to something which is perhaps refined striptease? Or is this unkind?
Well, it's unkind only because it is rather inaccurate.
London's Playboy Club was the embodiment of Hugh Hefner's fantasy, a celebration of sex and glamour. But in 1975, it was rocked by the brutal murder of a Playboy bunny called Eve Stratford.
It was a murder which led to a lot of fairly lurid speculation, but Scotland Yard are much more interested in hard facts than speculation.
In 1979, Linda Farrow, a croupier in a West End casino, died in apparently similar circumstances. Some police were convinced the murderer was the same man. I've come to question the links between those killings.
So for me, these are very different victims and very different crime scenes.
But digging deeper, I would unearth other tragedies.
She got attacked very brutally over her head and then raped.
And as I hunted for a potential serial killer, I would stumble across a different offender whose crimes struck at the heart of public trust in policing. If there's one thing that's more terrifying than the idea of a predator, it's a predator in a policeman's uniform. By 2023, I'd already spent years looking into this story. One of the most promising leads I had was the name of a former Metropolitan Police officer. He had known Linda Farrow, the croupier murdered in 1979, and her husband, Paul. He had been ruled out as a suspect, but Linda's mother, Gladys, had given me his name and told me to speak to him.
He was a ex-policeman, ex-publican, ex-Arab minder.
I'm going to call him Policeman A. He now lived in the Far East.
And by the way, I might be 20 minutes of bollocks where we talk about food, okay?
Yeah.
I think that's the...
Let me call him from my phone now.
Well, why don't I just call him from this and see if he picks up?
Yeah. All right.
Welcome to voicemail service. Please record your message.
God, this is so frustrating. I spent 4 hours calling repeatedly, going straight to voicemail, didn't get a dicky bird. Look, the thing is positive. He's going to speak to us. We just have to be really patient.
Back in the 1970s, detectives had no knowledge of DNA. But today, evidence that was gathered decades ago can reveal the identity of a killer. I wanted to know if modern forensic science might hold the answer to Linda Farrow's murder.
You worked on the Linda Farrow murder case, right, when the case was reviewed in the noughties?
Yeah, that's right. As I recall, I believe it was as a result of Lyn Farrow's, I think at the time, elderly mother. I certainly remember that there was quite a lot of weight given to Paul Farrow, Lyn Farrow's ex-husband, and obviously he was of significant interest to the original inquiry. But there was a lot of circumstantial evidence, but nothing they could really sort of hang their hat on to arrest and charge him.
The original investigation ruled Paul Farrow out as a suspect in 1979. He was never charged with the murder of his estranged wife, Linda.
I think he subsequently did die in the intervening years, so obviously that was a line of inquiry that wasn't open to us. So I wanted to go and find the original exhibits. The primary exhibit in this case really would have been the knife. Because obviously let's remember that from the time of the murder in the late 70s to the time we got the case, there have been huge advancements in forensic science. So there would have been a possibility of finding perhaps some DNA on the knife. And unfortunately, we could never find the exhibits despite, strenuous efforts to find them, which was very, very frustrating.
What should have happened to the exhibits?
I mean, that was before my time in the late 70s, but all the exhibits would be gathered, recorded, carefully sealed, taken to a storage facility, of which there were several. So what actually happened to them, I've really got no idea. It's a distinct possibility that they could well have been disposed of.
Kind of puts the kibosh on there ever being DNA evidence from the Linda Farrow case that might provide a link with the murder of Eve Stratford, the former Playboy bunny. I mean, the kind of story ends there.
Yeah, it does, unfortunately. I mean, I do remember, and this was really through conversations from colleagues involved in the sort of Eve Stratford inquiry. I think there was some outstanding DNA in the Eve Stratford case. So I can't really comment on what sort of happened afterwards, but I do always remember thinking that I thought the links at best were sort of fairly thin.
Incredibly, key evidence from the Linda Farrow crime scene had been lost. There was no way of using DNA to determine whether her murder was linked to Eve's. But DNA that turned up from another source took the Eve Stratford case in an astonishing new direction.
Hi, Martin. Marcel.
Hi. Hello, Marcel.
In 2006, former detective Martin Lee was given the job of looking at a number of cold cases.
What is the murder review team?
Any murder that wasn't resolved within a stipulated time period would be reviewed by an independent eye. So I was allocated a number of those and did some reviews of some investigations, which is when I had the conversation with the nice chief inspector at Colindale. When I explained to him that we looked at old cases and were looking for new evidence, DNA, new forensics and so on, he kind of latched onto that and said, I remember a case of Lyn Weeden, who was murdered all those years ago. This was the 3rd of September, 1975. She was a 16-year-old girl at the time. She'd been out with friends towards the end of the school summer holidays and was on her way home. And she walked down the alleyway and was struck on the head with something hard, blunt instrument, as we all say. She was then thrown over the fencing around an electricity substation where she was sexually assaulted, raped, and left there. She was found the following morning. She was still alive at that point, but she was taken to hospital and sadly died about a week later without regaining consciousness. And he said, I've always thought that that should be reinvestigated. I was conscious of the fact that there were, at the time, a lot of forensic samples had been taken, sealed, securely stored. So away it went for DNA testing, and I got a phone call sometime later from a very, very excited member of the Forensic Science Service to say, you won't believe this, we've got a confirmed DNA hit.
I mean, underline that, 29 years after the crimes committed, you have a DNA match.
Yeah, but it's not an individual. It's matched another crime scene, which was Eve Stratford, who was a bunny girl who'd been murdered 6 months earlier in March 75 in East London. I just couldn't comprehend that the two were the same because they were so dissimilar.
So in your mind, the only person who was at both crime scenes was the murderer?
Was the murderer, yeah. But what we were then conscious of was if we had Lyn Weeden in West London in September, Eve Stratford in East London the previous March, how many others were there? But we would never know that because way back in the 70s, DNA wasn't taken from anybody. So we started talking about the potential for other unsolved murders to have been committed by the same person.
The DNA link between the murders of Eve Stratford and Lyn Weeden was absolutely baffling. The two victims seemed to inhabit different worlds. Eve was an aspiring model who rubbed shoulders with celebrities. Lyn Weeden was a 16-year-old schoolgirl who had gone out with friends to a pub in the suburbs one Wednesday evening in 1975 and never come home.
Tell me what we're looking at here. What's this?
This is my diary from 1975, and I wrote in it every single night.
I wondered if you could read me the entries for September 4th.
As from last night at 11:30, I cannot write as I wish to. Lyn, my one and only true friend, was brutally attacked and raped. There was little idea of the person or people who did this. Lyn has been in West Middlesex Hospital since Wednesday and is critically ill with severe brain damage. I know myself, so deep down she will die. She'll die, but I cannot accept it. Lyn means so much to me. I love her more than anyone. Oh, sorry, that's... Lyn, she was a very brainy girl. She was very good at the languages, especially French and German, so she was going to go to college and then become a bilingual secretary. Looking back, it's quite a few years, but she had a little sort of a wicked sense of humour even then. But I did love Lyn, and she loved me. We just got on so well. She was a great girl, an absolute great girl.
Do you remember this September the 3rd, 1975? From what I've read, Lyn came to your house by bus. Mm-hmm. Do you remember that?
I would imagine we'd probably have got ready, done our hair a bit, maybe some makeup. As I can remember, we got the bus back, and then we met at the Elm Tree pub with the boys, and then just being in the pub. I can remember sometimes Lyn and I would go there, and we'd have no money, but the boys would rally around and buy us half a pint of whatever, and that would just last us all night. We weren't getting drunk or anything. We would just meet up and just sit there and chat and have good fun. Maybe, probably a game of pool or something.